I've made countless attempts, but my family refuses to leave the basement. It's been days, maybe even weeks, since they went down there, and something about that dark, earthy room has captivated them. I keep urging them to come upstairs to escape the damn, cramped confines of the basement, join me in the light. But no matter how much I plead, they won't listen. I keep hoping it's not too late for them to get out, for us all to escape this place. In Connecticut, there's a law that doesn't require sellers to disclose a death in a house unless the buyer specifically asks. I didn't know this until long after we'd moved in. By then, any second thoughts were useless. We were already part of the house's strange history. If only I had known, maybe then things would have been different, but it wasn't until a neighbor mentioned the previous owners in a hushed voice that I pieced together the disturbing history here. Our lives changed when we bought this house. At first, it was just an affordable fixer-upper. Gideon, my husband, and I were starting fresh, leaving behind memories we couldn't bear to carry any longer. The house was tucked away in a quiet part of town, perfect for blending in and keeping our grief private. It was vacant for years before the bank finally reclaimed it, and we thought we'd gotten lucky with the price. But from the moment we first stepped inside, a deep, suffocating sadness clung to the air, pressing down on us with a heaviness that was almost tangible. And then came the stench. Our realtor chalked up the smell to spoiled food left behind by the previous owners. He assured us a few open windows would air it out in no time. But as we wandered through the rooms, I noticed details that gave me pause. The cheerful new welcome mat felt disturbingly out of place against the house's decayed interior. Down in the basement, the smell intensified, prickling our eyes with its sour intensity. A single bare bulb swung from the ceiling, casting thin rays of light onto an uneven dirt floor. Near the far wall, where the light faded into shadow, was a wooden ladder leading down to something. The realtor dismissed it as extra storage space, his cheerful demeanor faltering as he guided us away. We didn't ask questions. We didn't know we should have. Shortly after moving in, we decided to place our daughter Bree's belongings in the basement temporarily, close by but out of the way. Her room was one of the house's many unfinished spaces, so we stashed her things down in the crawl space while we waited to complete renovations. But every trip down there was an exercise in dread. The crawl space felt like it was swallowing the light from our flashlights, as though it was absorbing it into the black dirt. And then came the noises. I was doing laundry one evening when I heard a sound behind me, like the slow drag of something sharp over cellophane. At first, I assumed it was Gideon, opening one of the boxes we'd stored. But when I called out to him, there was no reply, only a slow shuffling movement from the crawl space. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs and realized Gideon was home from work. If he was upstairs, who or what was in the crawl space? I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the next day I heard a giggle, the child's laugh echoing from somewhere below. When I leaned in to listen, it was as if it was coming from the depths of the crawl space, rising up through the grate in the floor. I told myself it was my imagination, but each night the sounds grew more persistent. The hollow laughter, the hushed whispers, and finally the soft, pleading voice calling me Mom. The night my husband joined me in the basement, we found something that left us both speechless. There, on the dirt floor of the crawl space, was one of Bree's blankets arranged like a bed, with her favorite stuffed toys placed around it. But it wasn't just the blanket. It looked as though someone or something had been lying on it. My husband's face turned pale as he whispered, "I didn't touch these." A few nights later, an officer came to our door. He warned us about the house. He'd responded to a welfare check for the Mikowskis, the previous owners, and found them in the crawl space, or what was left of them. There wasn't enough to bury, he told me, his voice a hollow murmur. I should have been terrified, but the voice calling me grew louder, more desperate, pleading as though Bree was down there, trapped and crying. It was a lullaby of grief and fear, and it wouldn't let me go. It reached inside me, a phantom ache, pulling me down the basement steps. I told myself it couldn't be Bree, but I couldn't stop myself. One night, as I approached the crawl space, I heard the voice louder than ever. Clear and familiar, I felt a moment of pure terror, a shrill sensation that started in my stomach and crawled up my spine. I leaned into the darkness, whispering, "No, baby, I can't." But the silence that followed wasn't human. It was an emptiness, a void that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then, from somewhere deep within that darkness, came a final whisper, "Then stay with us." In that moment, I knew that whatever was in that crawl space wasn't Bri, never was. But it wanted me, and now it has my family. I'm the only one left up here, clinging to the light, as the laughter from below grows louder, and I don't know how much longer I can resist. I work at a hospital that has some truly disturbing practices when it comes to autopsies. Let me give you some context. I'm a third-year resident, and I've just been assigned here, though assigned feels like the wrong word. It's more like I've been abandoned here in the middle of nowhere. You see, this isn't your typical city hospital. It's in a forgotten village hidden in a valley with a population barely scraping 300. The only thing I had going for me was the paycheck. Trust me, as a resident, that's a big deal. At first, my parents were less than thrilled when I told them, "Why would a place pay you that much unless they're desperate?" My mom asked, her voice dripping with concern. I shrugged it off. "Because no one else wants to work here. That's why," I said. But even as I spoke, doubts crept in. The village is as dead as the hospital itself, and even my flat, which I was told to rent, was just a sad, decaying first floor of some ancient building in the town center, which barely qualifies as such. The place reeked of stale cigarettes and alcohol. And my roommate, well, I rarely saw him, so that wasn't exactly a comforting thought. The landlord told me from the start, with an oddly serious tone, not to smoke, but I couldn't help but wonder, why the hell would I want to? The hospital itself is no better. It's about 2 miles away from my flat, standing there like a rotting monument to neglect. Half the rooms are moldy, and the basement, a place that sends shivers down my spine even now. Yet, the staff was kind, and they didn't seem to mind the strange decaying atmosphere. I didn't care much either. It was just a job, right? For the first few weeks, I did the usual rounds, checking in on patients, taking blood, offering the usual "How are you feeling today, ma'am?" spiel. It was dull, routine, and I was slowly becoming numb to it. But things took a strange turn when I was asked to take on a night shift at the morgue. At first, I thought it was just another boring shift, but then the nurse who asked me gave me a chilling line that made my skin crawl. "We need help in the morgue." That stopped me cold. "Who died?" I asked, but she just stared at me blankly. "People die here." I asked again, and she scoffed, telling me to take things more seriously. So I agreed, just to break the monotony. The hospital was eerily quiet that night, and I was writing up a report on an elder lady who came in for the 100th time just to check her vitals. Her eyes, though, they were unsettling. She kept staring at me, as if she knew something I didn't. Then, just as I went to close the window, I saw something that made my heart stop. Her reflection in the glass wasn't aligned with her body. She was bent over, head twisted unnaturally, but when I turned to face her, she was still sitting, smiling. I thought it was just the mold messing with my head, but the fear lingered. Finally, I made my way to the morgue. The basement was as creepy as I imagined, narrow winding hallways with yellow walls that seemed to pulse with decay. When I arrived, I found Dr. Lake, the morgue doctor, humming to himself while examining a dead squirrel. Yes, a squirrel. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but then he turned and gave me a strange smile, asking me to sign a document. It was an NDA. I should have said no, but something about his calm demeanor made me sign it anyway. Dr. Lake wasn't alone, though. He mentioned that they would be coming soon, there being more bodies. 2 of them, to be exact. He seemed almost excited and at the same time a little too eager. He kept repeating, "We die in pairs around here," as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know whether to laugh or run for my life. The morgue was freezing, sterile, and cold. The tables where the bodies lay were gleaming in the harsh, white light, and the smell of disinfectant was sharp in the air. But despite the clinical surroundings, something felt off. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for something, anything to break the silence. Then they arrived, 2 bodies, wheeled in by a nurse who looked like she stepped out of a nightmare. Her eyes were empty, her lips thin and violet, and her hands were covered in cuts. She didn't say a word. She just nodded at Dr. Lake, and together, we wheeled the bodies into the cold room. I stood there watching Dr. Lake prepare. He turned to me and said, "I need you to write this down." He began to dictate a series of rules, and as he spoke, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. Rule 1, don't talk to strangers. I was ready to brush it off as a joke, but his dead seriousness made me hesitate. Rule 2, Always observe your surroundings. Death doesn't just end a life, it disrupts the world around it. Pay attention to the details, not just the body. At this point, I was starting to realize just how deep this place went into the darkness. He continued with more absurd rules, including one about not looking at the blood for too long, and another about not looking at the photographs before they develop. The last rule sent a chill through my spine. When you leave, don't close the door completely. They need to leave first. I was too freaked out to ask more questions, but I still managed to ask, what are we doing here? What's going on? That's when Dr. Lake explained the unexplainable. Ever heard of purgatory? He asked, his eyes flickering with some dark secret. It's a place of transition for souls. It's not hell, but it's not heaven either. It's a waiting place. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if the cold I was feeling came from the morgue or the heavy weight of the truth that was slowly dawning on me. Something sinister was happening in this place, something far worse than the mold, the death, or the eerie silence. I was trapped in a purgatory of my own making, and I had no idea how to escape. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chills. Your support helps keep the horror alive. See you in the next terrifying tale.